Hi, this is Josh, and welcome to my first video blog. For the last couple of months, I've been writing about gardening from my perspective as a guy who was raised on a farm for about 18 years in southwest Wisconsin, and my perspective on what it looks like to garden in the city with those farming background, that farming experience. I've been writing a lot and very interested in gardening with a mission. Actually having a plan or making some decisions specific to what I want to get out of my garden, and I've been sharing some of those thoughts. Now, gardening with a mission, as I'm going to show you in just a minute, can be many things, and in fact many of them are going to obviously overlap. But I wanted to point out a couple of very specific ideas that I've got that you might want to adopt into your garden, perhaps a little bit too late here in July, but maybe next year. So a couple of days ago I had a class on making presentations, and I put together a short speech and have a couple of photographs to go along with it, and this is what I'm going to share with you today. The first thing is that you got to have a plan, and what I mean by this is you need to know where you're going to put your plants and how big your garden is, and actually figure out what's going to go where so that you can think about the future and the present. For the future, you want to think about where you're going to put your plants this year and where you're going to put your plants next year. Because garden rotation, even in a small plot, is very important. One of the good examples would be that tomato blight lives in the soil, and if you move your tomatoes around the garden, you can hopefully avoid the tomato blight from year to year. Another idea is that certain plants put nutrients into the ground and some take certain nutrients out, and as you rotate your plants around your plot, you can be sure that you are getting a nice balanced soil. Another mission is to garden with a tight space. So here's a picture of my 10 by 10 community garden plot. I have no option to go beyond that, because if I did, I would encroach on my neighbors or the path. And so I had to be thoughtful about what can I fit in a 10 by 10 plot. As I designed my plot, one of the things I had in mind was how to dedicate as much of the 10 by 10 or 100 square feet to dirt and as little as possible to paths. In fact, the keyhole design that I created, which was on the plan a couple slides earlier, I managed to figure out how to make my garden have only 13 square feet dedicated to garden path. Density is another thing to think about, particularly good if you've got a small plot like I do. On the left, you've got vertical gardening. So obviously beans and some things like cucumbers and peas will readily climb up a trellis. In fact, I have one trellis this year with just a couple of bean plants. I thought of this a little late in the season. Next year, I'm hoping to put up a couple of trellises and see what all I can get to climb in amongst the rest of my garden. On the right is garlic. And one thing I like about garlic is it's a very high value and very dense product that you can put into your garden. They only have to be planted about 4 inches apart. You can get a whole lot of garlic in a small space. So it's a really nice thing that you can densify, as it were. A lot of people are thinking about organic gardening. The idea is that these are all products that are ideal for organic gardening, including the product in the middle, in the little jug, that's an organic fertilizer. Timing is something I recently learned about as being important. I've always thought, get my plants into the ground as quick as possible, do as much as I can to get them to grow fast. And some people put in little hoop houses or cold frames to really get a head start. Well, this is Lawrence University's sustainable garden, and they grow food to sell to the university food service. Because there aren't students at Lawrence until around the 1st of September, their tomato and basil plants are relatively much smaller than your average Wisconsin gardener, and that's because they don't want produce to come in until early September. So here's a garden where timing is really important, and you may have some timing issues of your own. I'm big into low maintenance and high mulch, and this is just a little picture of some basil I have with some straw mulch. In my community garden, I have even thicker mulch, hay mulch from a local farmer, Marsh Hay. Mulch helps do three things. One, it keeps the weeds down. Two, it keeps the water in. And three, it helps protect the soil from rain or even when you're watering, so it is less likely to wash away, but even more important, less likely to splatter on your plants. This is really important if you're talking about keeping dirt off of tomatoes to avoid that leaf blight. So a rabbit unfriendly garden looks a little like this. This is my community garden with Jay as we planted it on June 3rd, and the first thing we did was put in a border of marigolds. Now, old wives' tale and maybe even some research has shown that marigolds repel rabbits, or at least they don't like to go near them. I don't know if that's true. I do know that they're very pretty, and right now they're in blossom and quite beautiful and make my garden look bright and cheerful. Another thing you can do if you're thinking about keeping rabbits out is simply not plant things that rabbits eat. So, for example, in this garden we have tomatoes, peppers, Brussels sprouts, and eggplant. None of these are particularly good for rabbits. In fact, it does bad things to their little rabbit tummies. And so, in this garden, it's naturally rabbit unfriendly because of what I planted. This made it possible not to have a fence around the garden, which I think looks nicer and was frankly less work. Another idea of a garden with a mission is only planting herbs. This is a picture of my herb garden at home. I had some extra space next to the driveway. I did build it up a little bit. You can see the bricks at the bottom of the picture. This is only about 7 feet long and maybe 2.5, 3 feet wide. And in this small space, I have very dense and quite frankly rather high value items. A neat thing about herb gardening is it can be done in a small space, and it doesn't have to be done in dirt. It can be done in containers. This makes it ideal for people in apartments or with just a patio perhaps to do some gardening. And quite frankly, it could be in a 5-gallon bucket with a hole in the bottom to let the water out. So in this garden, I thought you might like to know, I have 2 types of chives, regular and a garlic flavored chive, 2 types of parsley, curled and flat leaf, summer and winter savory. I have anise hyssop, that's what's blooming, the purple over on the right, and cilantro, that's what's bolting down on the left. Also have some oregano and dill, and I have a mint plant, but it's in a bucket that just sits on the ledge because I have been burnt by mint before. Do not plant mint somewhere you don't want it to go everywhere. So this is a real neat way of having a high value things. You know that basil and all of these fresh herbs are quite expensive in the grocery store. So there's 2 other gardening ideas that I have, kind of missions. I don't have particular pictures for them. One of them is to garden with harvest to harvest in mind. And I've got a friend up at Troy Gardens who is working on making sure that her garden is going to produce enough potatoes, onions, and garlic for her and her husband to eat from harvest to harvest. So she obviously has enough space in her basement to store them, and she has enough space in her garden to grow it. But I like the idea of thinking about what could somebody harvest or plant and harvest that wouldn't require buying anything from a grocery store. The other idea is something that we're working on in our community garden at American Family, which is to produce some food for a food pantry. And we've got a guy who is fortunate. He's on the board of the food pantry over in the Vilas Park neighborhood, and he has offered to bring food to the food pantry on Wednesday nights when they collect food. One of the things that we're thinking about, however, is what do they want? And so we're going to have to be thoughtful about bringing them the food that they want, especially considering spoilage and storage, etc. So we're probably not going to take lettuce or herbs because they wilt and go bad so fast, but they're going to love hardier things like eggplant and peppers and potatoes when that comes around. So planting a garden for a food pantry is another great mission. So clearly there are a lot of ideas you have here for missions, and obviously many of them are going to overlap. You might have a small organic garden, you might have a rabbit-friendly, whatever, dense garden. The idea is that, I said rabbit-friendly, I meant rabbit-unfriendly. Anyway, there are many different kinds of missions, and clearly they're going to overlap. But I think the main point here is a little bit of planning and a little bit of forethought. It's going to help you have a more rewarding and far more successful garden. Thanks for watching this first video blog. I appreciate the views and any comments that you might have. Also, open to suggestions if there's anything you'd like me to write about. So thanks again, and signing off.